All right, we can get this kicked off. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. The space today is brought to you by DagChats and Goose Magazine. I am Julius Optimus, and my fellow hosts today with me are Prof and Charlie Stivers, the publisher of Goose Magazine. And we have a very special guest with us today, someone I've admired for a while, Mr. Benjamin Diggles, who was a co-founder of Constellation and the man leading the federal efforts. First off, Mr. Diggles, thank you so much for joining us today. Would you like to share a few introductory words before we dive into the questions?
Hey, great. It's really great to be here. I would say, just to open up, I was like giving love back. I really appreciate all the hard work you guys do. And, I know I don't participate too much in social media or Telegram as often as I'm sure you guys would like. But I do see you guys, and I do appreciate all the kindness and support you've always offered. And you guys represent the good ones from my perspective. So for those that don't know me, I manage basically business development for the company, and that's been my whole career. Is I've always been somewhat of a BD guy, and for folks that don't know what business development really consists of, at least from my perspective, it's a blend of product, marketing, and sales. And so with that, when I joined Constellation, my goal was adoption from day one to see if this was real and make it very real. And I've been painfully myopic on that. And so I focused on federal enterprise, academia, and just like general partnerships across the board. And so I'm really excited to share some of the stuff that I've been focused on today. And once again, I really appreciate you guys having me here.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. And we appreciate everything that you do and taking the time to speak with us. I think you're a great educator, and it always really helps. Prof, you want to start us off here?
Yeah. All right. So I guess we'll just hop right into it. Diggles, can you share your perspective on the current state of cyber warfare and the merging quantum reality?
Quite the question, right? That's a mouthful. It's one of the things that those that are close to me, I don't tend to run my mouth too often. Like I said, I'm not on social media. I don't share my opinions very widely. But the beginning of this year, I sort of like my poor wife has to hear me talk about it almost every day. I was like, this is the year of quantum, like, and meaning that we're going to start to see things that seem almost like godlike technology, magic, just like holy crap. And with that, a lot of hacks are happening, right? Like they've been happening for a long time, but the sophistication of what's been taking place this year is next level. It's happening at the infrastructure level. Typically, most hacks take place in cyber warfare at the human level, and that's something that's probably never going to change. Well, I can tell you right now, it'll never change because humans are easy to compromise, right? You can bribe somebody to get a key card access. Next thing you know, you're in the mothership and you can take down a bunch of records and do whatever you want. And that's the most common thing is compromising people through corruption and greed. Or they're lazy. Somebody doesn't set their password, or they have a crappy password, or they haven't been doing, operational excellence, and somebody can get in. And so when we see these headlines, unfortunately, that's sort of the kind of eye roll at the other side of understanding what took place with a major hack. Was somebody just left some SSH keys on their desktop, and somebody grabbed a hold of that and got into the mothership. And so I think that we give hackers a lot more, props than they really need. That said, not to rest on our laurels, now with the real proliferation of AI, you look at what happened with Chat GPT. I think it was released in November or December of last calendar. And that was, I talk about putting the toothpaste back into the bottle. It's going to be real hard because now these things are effectively like bots on steroids that can do brute force hacks that we haven't even heard of before. And it's causing these infrastructure companies a great deal of pain. I'm not sure if folks saw or tracked what happened with MGM here in the last 2 or 3 weeks. But oh my God, like the sophistication of that hack that got all the way down to the slot machine level, which is really hard to wrap your head around, is baffling. And so because of this, I sadly, working with the Department of Defense, I sat down with a two-star general not too long ago, and I was like, look, I know a lot of people ask this question, but is there any way we can accelerate what we're doing within certain agencies? How do we get them to take this serious? And this person said to me, well, we have to wait for something tragic to happen, and that's usually when they react. And I get it, right? When it comes to cybersecurity, selling fear, I think, is a shitty approach. Like, oh, someday you might fall down some stairs, so get your family in a bunch of helmets. It's like it's just a silly way to go about selling, and that's not how I like to sell. I like to sell based off of value and expansion. That said, I think there's going to be a rude awakening that's going to continue to happen, as we've seen with MGM, the Pentagon. I mean, there's just been so many hacks this year. And I will shut up after this, but I'll say that personally, I've experienced more targeted attacks in my household and as an individual citizen in this last 9 months than I have in the last 10 years combined. So yeah, that's the state of cyber where I see it, and hopefully that made sense.
Well, I mean, with what you guys are building, you guys become a target, right? Yeah, I mean, like a lot of times, like hackers and whatever, they want to target people that are in this type of space. It's like a game for them.
Yeah, and on that note, and we are in times of war, and clearly we're competing with China, Diggles, as you shared in the past, with their blockchain network and all this stuff. So, given the current state of things, and it's drastic stuff that we need to get fixed, what are the unique elements of Constellation's technology that allow it to be an applicable potential solution to this problem of digital infrastructure weakness, grid vulnerability, et cetera?
Yeah. I mean, well, first off, my sentiment on this entire cyber warfare and readiness and sort of digital transformation is that it's not a tech war. It's not about technology. It's a discipline war. And China, as many may know, they got their kids in coding schools from like day one, right? They are so unified and they are all operating on one platform. And I've heard this from the Department of Defense, that the big difference between America and China is very linear when they go about their work. Everybody's on the same page. They follow one directive. Within the U.S. government, it is more fragmented than a broken piece of glass that's been shattered on the ground. I mean, it's everywhere. Every little siloed area is sort of attacking the problem with their own perspective, and that causes a lot of loss and wasted time. I mean, anybody that's filed taxes gets this. So that's a big reason why I'm always touting that China's blockchain service network is crushing. I mean, they're already in production and they use it both on the federal and commercial side, and it's a myriad of a bunch of different tools. To answer your question about what really separates Constellation is that we're really focused on building security at the ground level of infrastructure, rethinking these systems entirely, not patchwork. And that's a tough way to go about things because point solutions or add-ons will win all day, right? They're like, oh, great, we have a hole in the boat. Now we got this point solution. We can patch that hole. We're still bobbing on water. We're going to be fine. But that's not holistic in nature. If you've ever heard of SIPRNet, SIPRNet is arguably considered the most secure network in the world. I say arguably because I often say Bitcoin network is more secure, right? Mostly because there's a lack of people involved and it's very machine-to-machine oriented. Whereas SIPRNet is essentially like a really robust intranet that is a series of these terminals that have access to be able to communicate the most classified and top secret information, meaning those that have access to it have to have a certain level of clearance to be able to even touch it. And we effectively have been pitching that we want to replace that network. We want to go ahead and look at using blockchain, not just one blockchain, but a series of many, many, many blockchains to resiliently replace the SIPRNet and NIPRNet, which is the next layered up where they do stuff that's a little less classified. You don't have to be sending top secret stuff over that, but it's a little bit more robust and easier to use from a user perspective. But we believe that a communications protocol is required. And I often sort of get tongue-tied because I'm talking about consensus algorithms and whatnot. But if you see some of my briefing decks that I get in front of, high level generals, I effectively say, hey, we just built an ultra secure new internet. We built a new internet that effectively brings forth that vision of zero trust, which I often mock that term because I say zero trust is like real time. When that came out, it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and people just slap zero trust on their stuff and they call it a day. But the way I define it is that you don't have to trust the transmissions, the communications, any of the data exchanges, because the network has done that for you. It's governing all of that trust and validation so that we can really bring forth the vision of, true automation. And so that's really where Constellation is sitting. And I know that we see a lot of guff and kickback from the community, like, hey, what about this solution that's doing this in federal? I know like Spider Oak came up, which I have mad respect for, but that's a point solution, right? They're going after a specific use case and they're trying to be the blockchain for X, where we're trying to be the blockchain of blockchains that really interoperates everything as a standardized communication protocol at the infrastructure level.
Go ahead, Goose.
Yeah, I mean, from this perspective, it seems like you're operating in this blue ocean. Who are you like attracting or gaining attention from?
Yeah. I mean, so look, I'm probably going to use a million analogies on this call, just because that's what I've been doing in pitching to help people understand it. I often say that we like created a new electricity. And the thing with electricity is it has no value unless it has utility plugged into it, right? So it really comes to life when you plug a blender into it or some light bulbs, and then it's like, oh, there's the value. I can blend my stuff because this utility now can sing on top of this new infrastructure. But our electricity, as a company, we had to really narrow down some of these use cases and who we were going to attract, right? And those that have been with us for a while, I cut my teeth like 5 years ago on autonomous vehicles. And the reason why is because I just thought it was such an interesting research and development type of modality, because that was the phase of Web3 at the time, was very research, like where can this stuff work? What are its limitations? What's a good expression? And if you think about Bitcoin being that peer-to-peer financial exchange, you really don't get something as cool, much cooler than cars talking to each other from a peer-to-peer data exchange, creating situational awareness for each other. The problem with that is that I've got this, like, I call it Mr. Fusion. It's this chart that I run things through that are, hey, what's the time to value and what's the market impact, right? Sure, if the market impact of solving autonomous vehicles may be really big, really high on the y-axis, but on the x-axis it shows that, hey, the time to value is really slow. There's a lot of variables outside of just blockchain revolutionizing autonomous vehicles. Therefore, why would we put a bunch of money into this when a lot of stuff is out of our control? And even though it may make a big impact, it's going to cost a lot of money, and it's a Hail Mary. So once we had a chance to really get in front of, God, I've talked to just about every Fortune 500 company out there still to this day, and a lot of these federal agencies, we had to sharpen our pencils and really look at, like, what are the key entry points that not only have a quick time to value, but a demonstrable market viability transformation. And so to that, I'm not going to sit here and name off names of specific institutions outside of the big 3-letter agencies such as the U.S. Air Force, Navy, and so forth. Of course, I'll talk about U.S. Transcom, but we're focusing on frameworks that satiate the use cases of demand, right? I can get on there and say, oh, we can talk about autonomous this and that. And they're like, we're so far away from that. We just need clean data, right? And that's fine. But what are the frameworks that tie into some of these verticals or use cases that allow them to have rapid deployment? So we're not starting at square one. And the 3 that we've narrowed down is, and I would say this is in order of priority, is artificial intelligence, IoT, and then Wi-Fi and telco. And I can dive into use cases of where those can have impact on each of those. But I guess if you wanted to know of names, right now the U.S. Air Force, Navy, Department of Homeland Security, and the NSA are really our sweet spot right now of the institutions that we're working with.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And specifically, what I'd be curious is like the Space Isaac, Space Force, satellite to satellite communication, machine to machine communication. I watched your lectures on Space Isaac on Moby, and you were talking about that layer zero and this encrypted information sharing, global situational awareness layer. But is the hot item right now, is it the encrypted data communication between machines with the DoD, given like the Ukraine war and all this stuff and the value of satellites and how like space is a new form of power and warfare? Could you talk about that, kind of that IoT use case, and maybe Door can be talked about as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll tell you what, space is the new frontier, and that's such a stupid thing to say because isn't that like a Star Trek thing? Or anyway, but it really is like this porous environment of targets for spoofing and like signal jamming, since humans are deploying this infrastructure faster than they are securing it, which is sort of the emerging technology way, right? Get it out there, get slapped with fines, deal with the hacks later, but just be first mover to lock your place in. I mean, I don't know if folks have tracked Elon and Starlink and how many of those satellites just disappear. They go offline and they're like, "Oh yeah, we lost 22 of them this week." It's like, "What do you mean you lost 22 of them? That's now infrastructure that's up there ripe for the taking that could be used otherwise, and it hasn't been secured to the level of you being able to track it, And so first to market always comes with many, many holes. And when we started digging into satellite use cases and validating with some of these big primes that we're connected to, I thought that it was all about security, right? I keep thinking everybody cares about security, but I often say it's going to become a commodity, much like buying wheels on a car, right? You get a car and they're like, "Do you want wheels with it?" It's like, "What do you mean? It doesn't come with wheels?" Just like security. "Hey, you want this software? Hey, you want security with it?" It's like, "What do you mean? Is it just insecure by nature? It should come with it." And that's what I love about blockchain is I do believe it's just nothing more than optimizing existing infrastructure, and that security comes as a developmental practice into the infrastructure. But with the satellites, Door really paved the way for us. That was one of the best decisions we made as a company, and a big shout out to Michael Brand and Ben Jorgensen on that, because and of course we acquired people like Alex that have transformed our business in a major way. But yeah, Door, and I understand this is a pun, but has it been a doorway into secure IoT? And if you haven't seen what the Metagraph, what we've done with the Metagraph, it truly is bleeding edge technology and blockchain utility, true utility. And what Alex Ryle and the Eng team at large has done with this ideation of the integration net is truly amazing. But kind of bringing it back to your question about how that fits into satellites is, um, at first we thought it was about that security, but what we've learned from every one of our engagements is everybody cares about a data exchange, is monetizing that data. Because once you secure it, it's great, but there's so much value in this data to be used in different modeling algorithms, different data exchanges. There's a thing called the Unified Data Library where attribution is extremely important, in which case it's going to be bought and sold from a monetization perspective. And so I often call Door like a closed loop ecosystem, right? So let's just sit there and think about the Door metagraph that has gotten some love lately and is going to continue to be a guiding light for many use cases. Is you've got like this triangle, right? Like you've got the data providers, which are the hardware owners, and the data producers. Those are those that own the Door traffic miner. They're the ones that are providing the data. That's one of the pieces of the triangle. Then you got the transaction clearinghouse, which are the node validators, right? And that's another part. And then you have the data brokers or the buyers, which is the Snowflake and the Foursquares of the world. And in the end, if you had something to put right in the middle, it produces, that block explorer that produces the proof of foot traffic. And that's the value right there, right? And so the same happens with these satellites, which is if you think about us putting 1 million images on our ledger via a satellite sensor. The reason why Door was such a breakthrough for us was that it really brought to fruition the light node concept, right? You have these full nodes that are amazing for global L0 consensus, but then you have these light nodes that are really keyed for low connectivity and low power environments, which is a lot of what edge computing is. And one thing I love about Constellation, our engineering team, and I know this frustrates the community and others, is that they're focused on taking on the hardest solutions and doing them right, which means that it takes longer, right? Everybody wants us just to bust out tech, but what we've seen from other ecosystems is that one bad hole in a deployment can cause a lot of problems and a lot of FUD down the road. We would rather deal with FUD about being a little bit slower and not have to deal with shitty technology. And so we've been able to look at like what happens if a satellite loses connectivity, not if, when a satellite loses connectivity every day at 90-minute intervals. Sometimes those won't reconnect with the terrain, network operations center. So it may be 180 minutes. So that means that that sensor sitting on that satellite that's collecting and validating the fidelity and integrity of that image data is having to do it when it's not connected to the network. But once it does reconnect to the network, it sends that batched data back down, and the L0 provides that consensus to say, yes, it is doing what it says it can do. And that's an interesting use case, but where it really comes to what I would say the big picture is when you have 20 sensors sitting on that may be from different manufacturers that are running different protocols for their own sensor technology. I mean, a lot of folks don't know the IoT world. The reason it doesn't interoperate is because a lot of these protocols that are specific to an IoT sensor provider or hardware provider, they just don't talk to each other because that's by design. They don't want people to be able to see their data and whatnot, but it leaves so many opportunities and use cases on the table. And so when people ask, like, what's your X factor? I always say it's L0. I'm like, it's that ability to take data from multiple sources, even if they're competing vendors, allow them to interoperate and be incentivized by that interoperation so that it can create new insights that will leapfrog us from where we are today. So hopefully that made sense.
So do you see in the future, like anyone building an IoT device or working, because you talk a lot about standardized frameworks and the emphasis on that. And you've talked about the strategic use of pursuing federal and creating these standards, becoming the communication standard. Do you see in the future that instead of everyone building stovepipe solutions, everyone just builds to synchronize to this L0, and that's the huge cultural shift going on here?
Well, I wouldn't say that they're going to be forced. I think what it will create is sort of a industry pressure. I can talk a little bit about AI here in a bit because that's sort of a big fat target for us right now. But I don't know if you folks remember Clout, but Clout was like this social media tool that would pull in all of your social pipelines, your blogs, all your bullshit, and it would give you an influencer score, right? And then that influencer score gave you clout. And it even got to the point where certain hotels and whatnot, like the W would give you cheaper stays because they know that you have influence. And if you posted any shit on Instagram, it's going to look good for the W, right? And that scoring mechanism will apply to data sources here in the future. And that's what I mean by a standard. There's layers of standards. There's NIST standards, ISO standards, all things you have to follow to ensure your tech can be deployed. But being able to have a standard that the industry starts to follow by being a first mover is largely pulled from our pro scoring capability of our consensus algorithm. And so what I believe, instead of people being forced, like, oh, we all are going to build on this because it's the right, it's the best way to do it. It's more of like, hey, does your data feed or does the output of your communications have a score attached to it that has a proof of Explorer backing it to show that it is what it says it is? And imagine you can either do that and people will be like, great, you have the check mark and you have the scoring against this, or are you going to use a data feed that doesn't? And that's really what I mean by people probably, wanting to follow those standards. That said, when it comes to what we're doing with US Transcom, if you guys are up for it, I can maybe explain that use case a little bit and
Please
how the
do.
scoring, does that work for you?
Of course. We definitely want to
Okay,
hear that.
yeah. So I know some people have heard this use case just beaten to death, but I can't continue to beat it to death because I'm going to continue to beat it to death because it's absolutely paramount. I don't think people understand how big the work we are doing with the federal government is. So it affects the entirety of the entire government contracting layer, which is made up of close to like 20,000 contractors in the United States, which consists of something like 19 million employees. And this is based off of like 2023 Department of Labor data. And we're working with the Civil Reserve Air Fleet partners, which are sort of like contracting whales. These are like massive organizations like FedEx or UPS that have a huge commercial presence as their primary. But since they have such robust infrastructure, there's situations in which the government needs to tap these partners to do a mission, very top secret stuff, on behalf of the U.S. Air Force. So they may say, hey, we need to have two birds pick up some cargo or passengers in Uganda, and the government doesn't have those gray tails. So we're going to post this up onto a platform and allow bidding of these craft partners. And then these craft partners say, yep, we've got those birds, we can pick that up, and we're willing to do it. So it creates a contract. They then go and they execute against it while it's being monitored. Then when they return and everything's done, it gets reconciled and they get paid out. But much like supply chain management, there's probably about 7 or 8 different exchanges of communications in the chain of command from, hey, we need these birds, to, hey, pay somebody in the craft for doing it. And so what we're effectively building with the DoD is that each of these craft partners has their own blockchain as a metagraph, again, blockchain of blockchains, and they all pipe in to the US Transcom Global L0. Now, this is the first expression of this, that in order for them to communicate with the DoD, they need to be doing it on a secure metagraph. Now imagine if everybody had to follow suit, because it has the highest level of security with the lowest porous environment for threat vectors, corruption, spoofing. That's 19,000 contractors that are going to have to spin up some form of this secure entry point to be able to interact with our network. So hopefully that landed.
And that's what Ben Jorgensen brought up as far as like Constellation Network building these metagraphs, and they introduced this subscription fee for private networks, right?
Spot on. I mean, we often say it internally, we are masters at being able to spin up networks on the fly. And that is one of the big things that has kept many of our competitors at bay, is that it's so cumbersome to be able to set up, and it's so cost prohibitive. It's so energy prohibitive. And we hit all of the green marks for them to say, yep, let's lay down the gas. And that's what we achieved in our last contract, was proving our claims. Is it unhackable? Can it scale? If you were to try to spoof, or the penetration testing, the energy, how much energy does it use? And we were blown away to see that it uses wildly less energy than what's being used today in the status quo. And unfortunately, as you guys all know, with Bitcoin, there's this bad taste in the mouth that blockchain means that you're going to nuke the planet if you use it. So we've sort of been sliding under the radar by doing some really great stuff. But if you want to see how the craft use case sort of falls apart in a way, all you have to do is Google U.S. State Department recently hit by a cyber attack, and you'll get an article that comes up from August 21st of 2021. I've mentioned this a few times, and it's a silver platter example of how an orchestration meltdown took place. To this day, they still don't know even close to the exact logistics of what happened on that day, and there was a loss of lives, and it involved Civil Reserve Air Fleet partners, the Department of Defense, and a communication strategy that just it melted down. So while I like that 2-star general saying we just need something bad to happen, I'm like, well, what about this one? But I think that we're on the verge of seeing infrastructure attacks that are going to make this look like child's play.
Wow, that's illuminating, and I love the U.S. Transcom Global L0. So everyone would need a metagraph. Man, that's think big there. But you mentioned AI. We always talk about this, and it seems like you think AI will be a driving agent for DLT adoption overall, and why proof of source data is so important, or will be here soon. Could you share your thoughts on that topic?
Oh yeah, I mean this is a hot one. I mean Jorgensen and I were just on the phone prior to this, just geeking out that we have a lot of visibility into other major ecosystems, other blockchain groups. We all play pretty nice together, but I'm not going to name names because of obvious reasons. I don't want to fling mud. But what we've heard is that a lot of these folks have been going to AI conferences that are blockchain centric, and no one is talking about using blockchain within AI. It's really baffling, and I often think it's probably because AI is impossibly computationally intensive. Like generative AI is melting down cloud as well as data centers. They can't keep up. I mean, if you think about it, it's pretty amazing when you put in something into Chat GPT and it spits something out so quickly. But a lot of folks don't know that the reason why they have a $20 pro month account is because of the computational cost. I mean, I bet you even with that $20 a month, the margins are really, really thin, and it's not getting better, right? Because as we all know with AI, the more data, the better, and the more data, the more computational need you're gonna strain on a system. And so the reason why Constellation, I believe, is such a hand to fit the glove for the AI movement, and we're moving fast on this because there is going to be a hype cycle and at some point it's going to sort of fizzle out, but we're in a really great position and there's multiple entry points for us affecting AI. And this goes back to that assurance score, right? And if you think about validating data from the source that's being used for AI algorithms, attribution is not a popular topic for AI for obvious reasons, right? Nobody's talking about attribution. The only people are the ones that are like the content creators, the people like, hey, that was my content. I didn't get attribution. Let me call my lawyer and I'm going to sue them because now they're generating value out of my data. I'm not being rewarded for it or even told that it's being used. And it's, again, like I said, this is like toothpaste leaving the the bottle and trying to put it back in, because attribution at scale with that many data points is really, really hard. And so if you think what, not to pump us up too much here, but it's like iced tea without ice is you need blockchain and you need a scalable, very energy efficient blockchain that can operate at the edge. So one thing you have there is attribution. If you can have attribution against all of those different data sources, you sort of play the math backwards to see where it came from. And to me, that gives an assurance score. Hey, I need this AI to do an action X. If I plug this stuff in and it comes up with a directive, what is the assurance of clean data that fed into this? Is it 50%, 60%, whatever? And we believe that if you're able to secure that data at the source, say you just for a rudimentary example have an AI algorithm that has 4 data sources. 3 of them are on blockchain that allow a block explorer where you can do the math back and see exactly how it got to where it got. If it doesn't have that 4th one, you effectively have a 75% assurance score. We don't know this data. It could be spoofed, it could be faked, it could be whatever. And so that sort of forces the hand for these data providers to use immutable ledger technology at the source to make sure that when these outputs are doing things like missile commands, I don't know if you guys read about that lawyer that used Chat GPT for like 7 law cases. They were all wrong. He ended up getting sued. It changes the game, right? Beyond that, when you think about zero trust, with AI without blockchain is just another form for trust us, right? And that's not a zero trust approach. You need that proof of source. And then the other side is that once that data is cleaned and been processed through a blockchain, you now can feed AI algorithms for automation. Nobody's painting with the automation brush because the stakes are too high. You feed this data into something that automates something, it could go wonky because you don't know if somebody's meddling with your data. You don't even know if the data is perfectly clear. So it's not a profound thing. It's, shit data in, shit results. And then on the topic of generative AI killing the cloud, this is where edge computing, being able to process only the validation criteria implemented data required at the edge versus having to dump it all into a central server and use immense computational power to be able to make sense of it. That's sort of a laggard approach, but it's the only status quo we have today. And it's impossibly energy efficient. So say you have a piece of data that's worth $1, you're cutting your margins generously because it costs so much for the cloud to be able to process and validate that data, and it's slow. So, that's why when the, OpenAI and all these have tapped into the internet, as we all know, the internet is not the most honest place. A lot of folks don't know that over half of the internet is bots, and a third of, or a half of that half is malware. So that means that in effect, over 25 to 30% of the internet is functioning based off of nefarious lies. I mean, this is why you don't get into comments on YouTube, because you're probably going to get an argument with a bot that's just going to make you want to pull your hair out. And next thing you know, you're buying a product that you don't need. So hopefully that stance makes sense. We think that AI and blockchain are the hand to fit the glove. And I can't think of any other ecosystem that's best poised with our ability to focus on the infrastructure of node validation, as well as the consensus layer of the scoring mechanism that's going to take AI to the next level.
Man, that's awesome to hear. Thanks for that. And I know in the past, the Moby organization that Constellation was involved in, autonomous driving, and we talk about smart cities. And I know Jorgensen and Wyatt had something with, I think it was Quant 4 years ago, talking about smart cities, the future of smart cities, what's needed. Is it the L0 that's needed? And you made a comment. You're like, we have a solution in this arena. Would you be willing to talk about just smart cities and how Constellation's tech can help this futuristic vision come to life?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to mention one last thing on AI that feeds into this smart cities sort of paradigm, is that I am a tech guy, right? Those that know me, I'm less on the crypto side. I'm staying extremely focused on the adoption of the tech. But what gets me really giddy is the Web3 and crypto application to these use cases I'm talking about. The open AI attribution piece also comes with an incentivization layer, and that's what's so dope about our metagraphs, is being able to incentivize the data. Imagine and by incentivizing the data, you bring forth more participants that are willing to dump their data into the algorithm because they know that they're going to get paid, right? And if that payment solution based off of the value of their data is in the output of the AI algorithm, that's going to absolutely transform an entire industry. Because look, say you type something into like a chat GPT, it takes 4 data sources. One of them is a paid data source that has the economics or the commercials baked into that data, saying it's going to cost you 3 cents to use this data that I own, and that's built into the SDK layer of the incentivization model. So that way, when it gets used, they get reconciled on the back end in real time. I mean, it's a mind blower how it's going to absolutely change the way that we move data. And even going back to the satellite, being able to put the value of that data that is going to be expressed in a future data exchange, such as the unified data library, putting that at the source, my God, it makes people want to contribute data in a more meaningful way, which means we're going to have better results and better outputs when it comes to orchestration. The thing with smart cities, I don't know if anybody tracked Google's efforts in Toronto. I'm a nerd, so I track just about everything. Plus, it's part of my job, but they failed miserably, right? And usually if a company like IBM or Google fails at some concept, everybody thinks it's a fool's errand and it's dead in the water, which I violently disagree with. But that said, they wrapped up shop because they just couldn't pull it off. The problem with smart cities is a term that means a lot of different things to people, right? Some people think Chinese totalitarian social credit scores. You jaywalk, you're not allowed to get insurance because you broke the law. That's sort of the draconian side of things, and Skynet, which I don't want anything to do with. But then there's the other side of things, like if you take smart cities and you shrink it down into smaller ideas, and I think this is how we're going to win, is by doing things such as like a smart school, right? Like a smart school is essentially its own little ecosystem. And it's like, well, why does a school need to be smart? Unfortunately, we've had a rash of school shootings over the last, 20 years plus. And there's a need for situational awareness in which the technology that exists today needs to come together to thwart those things, right? So you may see things like a metal detector, drones, cameras, even having like door traffic miners for foot traffic efficacy, all of those data sources coming together at the L0. And this is where AI comes back in. And having an AI application that sits on top of that, that is constantly doing assurance scoring or confidence scoring, like, hey, somebody just walked into the building that came in at a weird time and they have a large piece of equipment with them that doesn't match what usually people do, and they're not on the manifesto of, facilities to be able to make it in. We're going to go ahead and alert this and do an action system and lock all the doors. And now I know that's a sad reality we live in because of just the state of humans, but we have the technology to fight back, to effectively make places safer through that situational awareness, much like the autonomous vehicle stuff I talked about earlier. But I believe that's a stepping stone. Going after a smart city is like trying to learn how to, drive a boat, but using a cruise ship to do it. We're better off with a cigarette boat or something very small and nimble to figure out, hey, is this really doing what we want it to do? And then how do we scale by just adding more systems to what I would say is that confidence scoring AI algorithm that sits on top of all of those disparate data sources being validated through the consensus mechanism of L0. So I'm a pause.
Man, that is it. Go ahead, Goose or Prof.
Yeah, so super high level and fascinating. Can you maybe expand on, and we're all hoping that we have some new Constellation listeners, maybe the parallels between the early days of the internet and ARPANET, and how the DoD was, obviously the first to adopt that with, the higher universities, and maybe intertwine that parallel with, you've been mentioning a lot about protocols today and how HTTP has a chance of being a standard protocol.
Yeah. I mean, those that know Constellation and anybody who's new, I'm happy you're here. We don't believe there's one blockchain to rule them all. We think that there's a lot of great consensus algorithms that are awesome for different use cases. I'm a huge fan of proof of authority as an example. I think that proof of stake makes sense in certain aspects. And, Ethereum is here to stay. We're not trying to be the Ethereum killer. We believe that there will always be a development community that we're going to want to work with. That's why we've built out EVM bridges and so forth to be able to effectively tap in to these other blockchain ecosystems. But that said, for those that don't know, the internet was born at a CERN, which is a very esoteric group, the more you learn about them. And between us, I believe that DARPA probably already has some pretty amazing distributed ledger technology stuff, much like the government had GPS before it was popularized and commercial. But that said, CERN created the internet and then it became commercial. And they did that in the 60s. And it became commercialized really for the real world, if you remember, back in the 90s, early 90s. There were expressions of it, of course, in the 80s. But I'm talking about when browsers started coming out, chat rooms, things that allowed people to effectively have a graphic user interface and not command lines. And that was where there was this arm race around the search engines, right? All of a sudden you had Alta Vista, Excite, Lycos, Conquest. I mean, there were so many of them. But Google came out and they had the algorithm that really changed the game. Now, are there other search engines besides Google? Yeah, but that's kind of the standard now because A, it's very fast and the results are fair and balanced. And it has an algorithm that, despite many people trying to loophole the hell out of it, it tends to be a really great one. And we're in the early stages of what blockchain is expressing in the same capacity. And I often tell people, like, if you want to see it, the maturity model of blockchain, it sort of is mirroring what we've seen with the move to the cloud. There's a lot of companies that are still on premise, especially within the government, where their stuff is on bare metal steel because they just simply don't trust the cloud. Even the DoD is really having a hard time migrating to it, and it's taking time. I mean, I don't know if anybody watched the recent Meta glasses, debut with Mark Zuckerberg talking about Ray-Bans that now have like Meta AI in it, and you can basically, it's like Google Glass. It's kind of a funny thing. They're like, you can Google anything. I was like, but anyway, point being is that these investments, while they may not make sense right now and the adoption may be a little slow, over time they're going to make a lot of sense and they're going to start to come to fruition. The thing with blockchain is it's just not sexy. You know, infrastructure is really hard for. We live in an application world. There's an app for that. Everybody thinks about, like, you know, what's the blender or the light bulb that attaches. That's where the quick money is at. Infrastructure, a lot of people want to shy away from it because it's really hard, but it's really sticky. Once it gets in place and it's being used, especially by an institution such as the Department of Defense, much like they were the first adopters of Internet Protocol and HTTP from CERN, they're going to be the first movers on HGTP from Constellation.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was gonna ask you. I remember a hypergraph hour, like 42 or something, and you gave an update. You're like, "Hey, I'm off LinkedIn. I'm done with social media. I'll see you in Web3." And I think a lot of us here, like we see Constellation, we see this vision. We're so excited, and it makes complete sense that federal should be this emphasis. As you said, it's like the internet. Start with federal. I think porn was next. Maybe we'll get an X videos metagraph here sitting out. But I guess, like, what is the next step for DLT to infiltrate the normal economy? Like, I know federal's into it. They've got the use case. It makes sense that they're first. They're seeing it. Where do you see this going in the coming years? How is it going to roll out? How is it really going to infiltrate everyone's life, like a Web3 social media or anything of that sort?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully I don't get egg on my face from my team, but I just feel like crypto did a big disservice to the technology layer of what DLT is. I think, and don't get me wrong, I love crypto. I think it's amazing, but I think people got a little bit drunk on that expression of finance being, you know, you look at Solana, 90% plus of their use cases are DeFi finance related. It's all around crypto. And we had to make sort of the unpopular decision, even though it was fundamental to our ethos, to focus on complex data types. We believe data is much bigger than finance. A lot of people don't know that healthcare data is worth 7 times the amount of financial data. Now imagine if you can interoperate that, you can manage the transactional underpinning. I mean, it's huge, right? But it's just not as sexy. People want to make money. So when they think blockchain, they think crypto, and then they think FTX, and they think scams. And unfortunately, most of that is right. That said, companies like us that have been keeping our eyes on the prize of true infrastructure and making mainstream adoption, I think are going to win. I wouldn't get up every day and just bust my balls if I didn't believe in this stuff through my core. I feel called to it. It's such a it's tied to my soul. That said, I believe when we're going to see the public really light up around blockchain is they won't even know blockchain is part of it. I don't think anybody's going to care. Most people don't know what HTTP even means. They don't know what a URL stands for, right? We don't talk in that language. But right now we're in a kind of like how it works R&D phase into that production world where people are having to use terms like consensus algorithms and so forth. But we're going to live in a time where I've always said the future is around microservices, micropayments, and micro investments. It's going to change behavior. It's not a tech thing. It's a discipline thing where it's like, hey, you can either participate in this and make money or participate in this and don't make money. And by time and over time, the things that don't offer some sort of a value exchange to participate in the value chain, they're going to go away. I'm part of this group. I was an early beta tester. It's called Bumped, and it's a company that what you do is you put your credit cards into the app, and then they have a list of vendors that they participate with, and you get stocks based off of spending money with that vendor. But you have to pick one. So it'll be like, all right, do you want to pick between Lowe's or Home Depot? And I'm like, all right, I shop more at Home Depot. So I put that in my app. And it knows my credit card, my Amex, as well as my debit card. Now, when I go to Home Depot and I spend money, I get stocks from that company as a shareholder. So it's almost like buying stocks, but just doing it through spending my money. And it has demonstrably changed the way that my wife and I shop because we prioritize vendors that have better yield. You know, Nordstrom has 2.5, Neiman Marcus has 2%. All right, if I need jeans, where am I going to go? And that discipline has shifted because now they're looking at me saying, hey, we want you part of our value chain. We really are loyal to you if you're loyal to us. And we're going to prove it by putting money where our mouth is. That's where I think everything's going to change. Is there's going to be a convergence. I just think that the wallet wars and a lot of this stuff is still a little bit too cumbersome for people to adopt to it just yet, but it's right around the corner.
Goose Prof, I've been hogging this, so you guys feel free to take us home here the last 10 minutes.
I think Diggles kind of answered the question that I was going to ask. Because I was going to ask, and maybe even you could elaborate on this if you feel like there's more you could add, is what do you see that Constellation Network is doing that actually differentiates itself and makes itself useful in the crypto space over Ethereum and all of the popular ones out there? What are the key things that you guys are doing that that you feel are the most powerful parts of what you guys are doing?
Yeah. I mean, we're taking the less sexy approach, and we're focusing on tapping into the legacy. We're working on rethinking infrastructure of the existing world versus over-indexing on tools for the emerging world. Even though we have amazing tools, I mean, you can mint an L0 token on testnet right now and start doing some amazing things in the integrations net. And so we really want developers to start kicking the tire on that. But because liquidity is low within the ecosystem of Web3 and money isn't as abundant and moving around, people are trigger shy. But I'll tell you, who does have a ton of money is the legacy. And they're freaked out. And they're trying to figure out how to get ahead of the game. Our thesis, and I fully believe in this, is how do we tap into the minds of the legacy to bring them into Web3 versus trying to bring Web3 to legacy. It's just, and it's been working. And that's one of the things I think is a massive differentiator for us, is that we're attacking hard problems and we're building real tools for the real world. And I'm not mocking Web3, metaverse world and whatnot, but we're building tools that are attracting these fundamental CIOs and CTOs that want digital transformation around the value exchange, around secure information sharing, around attribution, and so forth, unlocking a whole new world of value for them. And honestly, they could give a shit less if it's built on blockchain. As long as it works to them, it matters. And so the ability to move value around amongst these groups that are sitting on massive amounts of value but are scared shitless because they don't want to let it out. We're tied up with like NOAA as an example, the weather folks. In fact, my wife and I are going out to have a private view of their facility this afternoon, which I'm super stoked with because I've built such a strong relationship with them. But before they even told me their business plan, I pitched it to them and they were like, God damn, you're spot on. I was like, let me guess. You guys are trying to monetize this massive amount of data you're sitting on, but you're afraid to leak it out because once it's out the door, you don't know where it's going or who's using it. And that's just a waste of time and money. And so they're desperately trying to figure out how to monetize this massive legacy of data that they've been sitting on. So I think that's a big differentiator for us. When we talk to other ecosystems, they're just like, God damn, we never even thought about that at all. But they may not even have the technology to entertain it.
And so if we have any developers that are on this call and listening, where do you think is the best place for them to go, and what should they do to get a chance to actually build on testnet and put a vision together right now?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the team has done an incredible job with the Euclid SDK. If you go to euclid.is, and I know that term may not come through on audio, or just go to Constellation Network Developer Docs, you can find it on our website. We have step-by-step instructions to be able to spin up your own blockchain network on the fly. And we're even giving away some grants for node validators that are looking to get into production. So depending on how serious you are, we're willing to reach out a hand and help you out and work with you. There's also hypergraph hours where Alex demonstrably shows people how to set it up step by step. And that's another area that we're about to dip into. We've always kept it sort of on a back burner, but it's been on a burner, is the university layer. No offense to folks on this call, but I think that Web3 and sort of this community movement has created sort of a toxic environment of traders focused on crypto, where these young university students actually want to build solutions. And that's where we're trying to tap into, is people that want to build and want to actually do stuff. So I highly encourage, at some point I'm going to create a Diggles token. And I have this idea of where, I have a token that if you want to get a meeting with me, you have to, buy some of my tokens, send it to me, and I'll burn it. And then you have access. Now I have my own utility against an L0 token in my own little tiny ecosystem, protecting me from meetings. You want an hour of my time? It's going to cost 500 digs. Why not? There's a lot of fun stuff you can do without having to, be a big enterprise. And that's what I love about Constellation, is we have entry points for small businesses, mid-sized businesses, and enterprise. And in my history of working at Oracle and other major enterprises, that's always been like, no, you got to pick a lane. You're either an SMB or you're an enterprise. Constellation can tap anywhere in the maturity model.
And I know Constellation Network, the way it's being built, it's supposed to be open to like different types of developers. But in your opinion, if you have an answer to this, what would you say is the strong coding languages that a developer could find useful when they build a metagraph for the network?
Well, we're JVM, so Java. And we did that by design. We wanted to tap into the largest developer community in the world, which is Java. And so JVM is all you need to know. Yes, is our protocol based off of a really intense language known as Scala? Sure. And we have some really robust Scala engineers, Ryle, James, shout out to you guys as well as others. But the goal was to build and what we've done is to build that developer tool layer so that you don't need to understand and have to learn a hard language, but you get to use an easy language that most already. So even if you don't know Java, you could probably find somebody on Fiverr pretty quick to help you out, right? So that's my answer.
Yeah, that's great, because Java is definitely the most widely used coding language that's out there.
Excellent. Well, hey, we're coming up on the hour, Diggles. Thank you. Or Goose, sorry, did you have something before we close down?
Yeah, I was also going to just offer Diggles the opportunity to share if we can get another shot of Diggles in the future. Is there a future hypergraph hour that you have coming up you want to share with us?
Well, first off, I want to give you a big shout out, Charlie. I think you're such a great guy, and I'm so glad that we met, and I support everything you're doing, as you well know. So thanks for being here and always being you, buddy. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because my team probably be like, God damn it, you didn't mention the one thing you were supposed to. So we have a hypergraph hour coming this Wednesday, which is sort of a remix of what I just covered, but we're bringing on one of our strongest key advisors to share a lot about what we're seeing. He's going to tell a little bit more of a detailed story about what agencies are doing what's the big picture. This is somebody who's been in federal for his whole career and really has accelerated our pipeline by about 10x. So we are at the seat of the table right now, which is awesome. So Wednesday, we'll have a hypergraph hour. You'll hear a lot of the stuff I've already covered here, but in a little bit more detail. And you'll get a chance to see the caliber of the type of people we have in the throes. We don't share a whole lot. We've got a lot of aces up our sleeves. We have a lot of companies and different things we're doing behind the scenes. Kind of twice bitten, once shy. I've had situations where I leak stuff out. Next thing you know, I'm getting a call from the institution. So please make it to the Wednesday call if you want to hear more about this, where we're going to go into some more visual detail of the topics that we just covered.
Excellent. Hey, thank you so much, man. Bright future ahead, and can't wait to see it all unravel. So really appreciate your time and your ability to diffuse this technology into things that you can understand. It always makes me think of a million different things when you bring stuff up. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet, guys. I really appreciate and love you all. Just for those that know, I'm not a social guy, so if you see this Diggles burner email, I usually delete the app right after these spaces and then rejoin when I need to. I try to stay focused. So thanks for everything you guys do, and stay positive. I know it's been a weird phase across the entire Web3 ecosystem, but we are on fire, and I am so stoked. So I appreciate the chance to share my passion.
Thanks, Diggles.
See ya.
Heck yeah. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you later.